how do you act or deal with a world in which people are willful against their own self-interest, just to spite you, just to troll you? What do they get out of it? You know,
Hmm.
is it just pride? What can it be? Can it be disarmed? How would you disarm that?
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Fly above the clouds, and I ask the Lord, what does it take to get down? And every time I ask, he teaches me the same thing. Just bleed originality.
Fyodor Dostoevsky was born in 1821 in Moscow to a strict religious mother and a domineering father, a doctor at a charity hospital for the poor who was so disliked by his serfs that they may have murdered him. Dostoevsky was just a teenager when he lost both parents, and by his mid-20s, he was arrested for attending radical intellectual salons. His crime? Reading banned political texts. He was sentenced to death. At the last possible moment, literally seconds before execution to a firing squad, a messenger on horseback arrived with a pardon from the Tsar. It had all been staged, an elaborate psychological punishment. Dostoevsky had already said his goodbyes, already thought his last thoughts. He would later write that those final minutes changed everything. He never forgot the feel of the sunlight on his face or the faces of the men beside him who would never be the same. Then came 4 years of hard labor in a Siberian prison camp where he was forbidden to read anything but the Bible. He emerged broken, epileptic, impoverished, and reborn. This wasn't a sanitized religious conversion. It was brutal, raw, and unresolved. But it marked the beginning of what would become one of the most spiritually explosive bodies of work in world literature. He didn't write books so much as detonate them. Dostoevsky's novels aren't polite explorations of morality. They're desperate dialogues between angels and demons, reason and madness, belief and blasphemy. And all of them happen inside of a single human soul. Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, The Brothers Karamazov. These aren't simply books, they're battlegrounds of the mind and the heart. He had the uncanny ability to write voices that weren't his own. Atheists, nihilists, mystics, terrorists, holy fools, all speak with equal power. He didn't caricature, he inhabited the characters. That's why both Nietzsche and Solzhenitsyn admired him. That's why Sartre and Camus called him a forerunner. That's why Jordan Peterson quotes him constantly. It's why monks and misanthropes both claim him. Fyodor Dostoevsky was not your typical literary genius. He didn't look the part. He was awkward, intense, small in stature, with darting eyes and a nervous stammer. His gambling addiction once had him pawning his wife's shoes and then begging friends for the money to buy them back. He lived perpetually on the edge of bankruptcy, mental collapse, and spiritual crisis. And yet, out of this chaos came some of the most searing, transcendent literature ever written. He wasn't trying to convince you of a position. He was trying to get you to look at yourself deeply and unflinchingly, to face your illusions, your justifications, your false gods. He believed the human soul was a furnace where good and evil are forged in agony. And he dared to ask whether salvation, real salvation, was even possible in this world. And that's why Dostoevsky still matters. We live in an age of spiritual confusion, shallow certainty, and moral performance. Dostoevsky offers no easy answers. He forces you to ask better questions. Is freedom a gift or a curse? Can a person truly change? Can God be trusted when life is unbearable? What if suffering isn't just something to escape, but something that might impossibly redeem us? He's not a safe writer. He is politically messy, religiously unsettling, and morally dangerous. He is also strangely, fiercely hopeful. He believed in grace, not as a cliche, but as a terrifying and burning reality. His novels are like cathedrals of contradiction, where doubt and devotion kneel side by side. So, this series won't teach you about Dostoevsky. It's going to bring you face to face with him and with yourself. Because for Dostoevsky, the soul isn't a metaphor, it's the war zone, and the stakes are eternal. Well, cheers, Professor.
Well, what a opening.
It's quite an opening.
A lot to live up to.
Well, you've had a little experience with this guy, apparently.
Oh, I taught him for a long time, many, many years.
Yeah, well, as we get started, can you tell us how long you taught him and what was the
Oh,
class? Or was it
uh,
multiple classes?
pretty much one. I taught a class on the Russian realists in translation, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Chekhov.
Okay.
And I would read Brothers Karamazov every year for maybe 25, 30 years, I think.
That is crazy.
So, not that I reread it every year, but most years I did, and most years in discussing the book with the students, you'd read a good portion of it all over again. And yeah, it's one of those books, it never ends. It's a constant conversation. And one year you read it and you kind of root for one character, and the next year you root for another one, and it's a very intense conversation that takes place constantly between all of these figures, these saints and these sinners, these murderers and these uh, spiritual directors and everybody in between. And that's part of, in the introduction, that they don't, when introducing the extremes, you forget that he also includes everybody in between, which means, the marginal atheist, the the partly religious fanatic,
Yeah.
not just the extreme case. But we remember the extreme cases because they've become the most powerful and eloquent voices for their point of view.
Yeah.
And
I like the synopsis in the intro of like we live in an age of spiritual confusion, shallow certainty, and moral performance.
mm,
I have not read Brothers K 25, 30 times. I have read it 0 times, and I'm part of the way in on it, and I'm part of the way in on this one. I can show you how far I am
oh, okay,
on Crime and Punishment.
yeah,
But that I truly have been reading. It's not like audiobook or anything. I've been focused when I read it. And then but even in just those two, I see the spiritual confusion, the shallow certainty, and the moral performance like embodied in characters, which is really cool.
yeah, yeah,
But
and
the shallow certainty really marks our day, and
oh,
spiritual, actually all three: spiritual confusion, shallow certainty, moral performance. So
yeah,
why so relevant? That's part of it right there.
oh, yeah, and that's why you can see why Jordan Peterson goes to him for quotes, and
Yeah,
and why Nietzsche said that that Dostoevsky was the only psychologist from which he had anything to learn.
that's such a compliment.
And coming from Nietzsche, it's very interesting because it explains the difference between Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. You read Nietzsche, and you come away with these telling aphorisms, these powerful paragraphs, even these arguments. But you read Dostoevsky, and those arguments are given flesh.
Hmm.
It's sort of like, well, what would it be like to really believe that God was dead? How would that change the way you lived?
Hmm.
And what if you believed God is dead, but the woman you love didn't? Or your best friend and your brother did, and you didn't?
Yeah.
And that becomes a scene in the novel. And that scene in the novel isn't there to entertain you. It's there to try to work out, okay, what's a human being? How do the beliefs shape who they are? And what do they do with with these ideas? Do they perform them and not believe them? Do they really believe them and then fake not believing them? Um, the human being is a very complicated spiritual, psychological reality that Dostoevsky kind of redefined. And that's why he's kind of the father of Christian modernism, because he sort of redefined being a human being in a way that Kant and the German idealists never did. It's so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of like he had to write literature because philosophy had become too rational. It was human beings aren't rational.
Okay, sorry. So that triggers me
Okay.
exactly to theology. It's like, here's what theology has become so rational.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read another here's proper theology book,
Oh,
but give me Dostoevsky, you know? It's like
oh,
the same thing happened with philosophy as with theology then.
oh, exactly. Yeah. And uh, Milan Kundera, the Czech novelist, he has a wonderful book. I recommend it, The Art of the Novel. And the novel was born roughly, most people say that the first novel was Don Quixote or close to it, in terms of telling the story of a person trying to live the truth of their values in a real world or an imaginary world that was real, not
Hmm.
in a abstract philosophical space where you control the argument and you try to amass a rational purity that borders on mathematics.
Hmm.
So the inner life went to literature, not philosophy, and philosophy forfeited and got in.
And would we say that happened in the 1700s or 1600s with Don
Yes,
Quixote, or is he 1800s?
right around. I think he's 1611 or 16.
Yeah, I thought he was a lot earlier than some of these guys, huh?
Yeah, so it's right. It's right when it happened. You know that um, when we talk about modernity, you know, we have these different definitions, and the Enlightenment is part of it, but it isn't the complete in modernity because modernity includes the Renaissance and the Reformation and things like that. Uh, Elie Wiesel, I don't know if you know him. I wrote a book called Night, a Jewish writer, survived the Holocaust,
Yeah.
won the
I
Pulitzer.
know I know the name. I haven't read anything yet.
Yeah. Well, he won the Pulitzer, the Peace Prize, the Pulitzer Peace Prize, and he tells that he has a sort of a Hasidic story that explains modernity, and he says, you know, right around 1600, man and God had a conversation, and man said to God, you know, you've been in control all these years, and we've been trying to, you know, believe in you and follow you, but we don't really know your experience. So could we change places for 5 minutes, just so that I could see how I look through your eyes, and you could see how I look through my eyes? And God says, well, you know, that I appreciate the sentiment, you know, but if I ever let you become God, then how would I know that you would ever change back?
Hmm.
And man says, oh, no, I would change back. You know, this is just a thought experiment, and I just want to look at the world through your eyes for even just a second, and then come back down to being a human again. So God said, okay, let's do it. So they traded places. And the minute that man became God, he no longer wanted to trade back. And so at that moment, God became man and man became God. And the Spirit of God lives in man, and man plays as if he were God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the story of modernity. Human beings trying to become gods,
Usurping God.
usurping God's power and prestige for themselves. And he says, says it as a folk tale. And then he says, and so this has gone on for 400 years. And only in the last 100 have both parties become uncomfortable with the arrangement.
Oh yeah.
And he's talking about,
Oh, I wonder if that quote's in your book.
I think
Sounds familiar.
it's in there. The
Yeah.
story's in there. And Dostoevsky realized that both parties had come uncomfortable with the arrangement. And some of the characters are more uncomfortable than others. Others are more content to usurp the authority of God for themselves. But none of this is left without its real world consequences on the quality and the nature of people's lives and how they come to understand who they are and what faith is and if God is even a believable a possibility, or is it a human concept, or all those crazy debates that all his characters have.
Yeah.
So that's the world of Dostoevsky. It's a world in which it's not the arguments and the struggles between the saints and the sinners and the murderers and the psychopaths and the aesthetic geniuses uh, doesn't take place in rational Kantian space. It takes place in the lives of people in existential reality. And that's the world that he describes. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you read a book like his master, and all his books were avant-garde literature in the sense that they were breaking all the rules regarding character structure, plot structure. He wasn't trying to write bestsellers or tell these comfortable or interesting stories about people. He was trying to get at reality and test these ideas against real human beings that he could imagine. So, like every,
So would you say, because that's not the only time I'm hearing this about Dostoevsky. He's not you have this quote in the book from Rene Girard about how it's not about his quality writing. Would you say it's almost not that he's a writer even? It's more that he's playing out psychology and philosophy through characters, and he was forced to do it through writing fiction because everything had become so empiricist. He needed to have a theater to play out his ideas,
exactly. Well,
and he knew it.
yes.
I mean,
And
that's pretty cool right there. Just like that's a very cool, unique thing because like he's not known. There's multiple insults on his body of work as like not the best writing, like flawed.
yeah,
And I'll read that quote from your book. Most of his novels, and this includes a Rene Girard for the audience. This includes
yeah,
a Rene Girard quote, who is in our future of subversive orthodoxy people that we're going to talk about. But most of his novels are not great works, but flawed, moral/aesthetic experiments, heroic attempts to solve insoluble problems, to reconcile Christianity with Enlightenment skepticism, faith with doubt, terror with hope, and most of them fail. Even you said
mhm,
that's you talking. Then
right,
Rene Girard even goes so far as to say Dostoevsky and his work are exemplary, but not in the sense of a corpus of work and a life without fault, but in exactly the opposite sense. In observing this author's life and writing, we learn perhaps that peace of soul is the most difficult of conquests, that genius is not a natural phenomenon. So what
Mhm.
did you mean by that? He's like, or what did Rene Girard mean? He's just, you're watching a soul thrashing for meaning
Mhm.
and working it out through a crazy amount of writing through their lifetime. Is that kind of what he's saying?
Well, yeah,
Hacking till he finds something.
well, you said it well at the beginning when you talked about his life-changing experience before the firing squad.
Yeah.
He was not in the first group that were brought before the guns, the firing
The
squad.
second group, right? And the first group got shot.
Second group, and the first group they fired blanks,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and the first group, um, I think there were four in the first group, and one of those guys later committed suicide. Another of those guys had a nervous breakdown. Another of those guys never recovered from it psychologically, went crazy, and one of them uh, apparently survived and served out his term with Dostoevsky in the labor camp in Siberia. Dostoevsky himself, being in the second group, experienced it with the same degree of trauma, pretty much as the ones who survived it. And that's when he became epileptic.
Mm.
From that point on, he had epileptic seizures for the rest of his life. And in those epileptic seizures, he would have moments of clarity that would precede the seizure that gave him mystic experiences that informed his writing in terms of the characters that he had who lived from their religious uh, moments of sublime uh, epileptic joy, as well as the suffering he endured living in a labor camp for 4 years. Um, and the guy, yeah, and you got to remember, Dostoevsky was, I think he's 27 or 28 years old when this happened, and he'd written a couple of short books, but he translated Balzac from the French into Russian. So he was a radical literary scholar, and now he's being thrown into one of the worst labor camps in the world, a Siberian labor camp. Um, and, a 28-year-old intellectual writer with every mother raper, father raper, psychopath, uh, enemy of the state, all in, this muddy barracks, uh, and just trying to survive among those people. Needless to say, changed him and changed his politics and turned him from a liberal wannabe reformer who had joined a discussion group that had been infiltrated by the czarist police to a guy who had decided that he could not waste another second of his life if he was going to be the next great Russian writer, which the critics in St. Petersburg. So Dostoevsky was living in this labor camp and had decided the moment that he survived that he would not waste another minute and become the greatest writer in Russia. And this was not an impossible ambition because he'd been told in St. Petersburg by the critics that he was the next great writer. And this, at the time,
Are you saying he said that that happened before?
yeah, before he'd been joined the discussion group and had been arrested, he'd been told by the local uh, literary elite who had read his first book, Poor Folk, that there was a breakout, that he was the next great Russian writer, and it went kind of to his head. And a lot of descriptions of him at the time were that he was a bit of an asshole in terms of thinking that he was all that. And this experience he had being betrayed by the guys in his discussion group who were Tsarist spies and sentenced to death for treason, and then brought up, and sent to this labor camp, um, really cooled his heels. And he began thinking, okay, if I can't waste another second with ego, and I can't waste another second not preparing to be the writer that I want to be. And so I'm going to do my time as well as I can and get out of there as soon as I can, so that I can get on with the business of writing um, the hitherto uncreated conscience of the Russian people, which is not like Joyce, a an intellectual conversion so much as a kind of survival of his own soul under extreme duress.
And trying to represent his people's soul.
Well, to try to represent what the Russian soul was, and realizing that it wasn't all that great, that there was uh, a dark side to the human psyche that he had not really experienced until he went into that prison camp. And that prison camp changed his politics radically, because that's where he developed what he called the psychology of the underground. And that changed his entire worldview. And another way of putting it, not so much a worldview, because that makes it sound sort of philosophical or Kantian. Uh, it was a completely different anthropology. What shapes a human being? He's not a rational social animal. In the Notes from the Underground, Dostoevsky says, that the human being is not the rational animal. He's the ungrateful biped. And he doesn't live for his rational self-interest. He lives to not be your fool and to not suffer your patronizing. That there's a pride at the heart of man, which is
Whoa. Almost like competitive more than anything.
uh,
Like, I don't want to be put down. I don't want to be your fool.
right. Well, it's both his glory and his failure that we have this. That uh, that what he learned in the prison camps were that the guys who survived, they would beat the crap out of you for a cigarette,
Yeah.
and they would die before they let you punk them. And Dostoevsky's saying, well, what is with this? Why would you die for a cigarette? Why would you beat somebody within an inch of their life for something that didn't matter? Oh, I see. I don't really understand people at all.
Mm.
I have to recalibrate. And have I been doing this?
Wait, so that was in the prison camp?
I was in a prison camp.
So he has these formidable, well, formational events, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, thinking he's the next greatest writer,
Yes.
then facing his death
Right.
and the psychology of all that with all the people involved. One thing I wanted to ask you is, like, before we go into another segment, can you, I think it's a good time now because you mentioned it, just unpack that theme that you see overall of the underground. And that
Okay.
might help frame where we're going with other things.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, so he has the book Notes from the Underground, which is told. I started that on audio, and it was really hard because it was just like you're in one guy's mind for like an endless amount of time in the intro, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do this right now. It was heavy.
Yeah.
Just the start of it was not like a hook. It was like, wow, you're in deep in some crazy guy's psychology.
Yes. Okay, well, you want to show me talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, you said Notes from the Underground is almost like a way of looking at the world, or the underground is a metaphor or something you were telling me that you want to go into.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to. I think that
The psychology of the underground as a cartography of the inner life,
yes,
which I
um,
don't know what cartography means.
a map.
Okay.
So at one point in his career, when Dostoevsky was famous, they asked him, of all your novels, which novel do you want to have on your gravestone? Do you want to say author of Crime,
Interesting question.
Crime and Punishment or Brothers Karamazov? What is it? And he says, well, I want to be known as the discoverer of the psychology of the underground.
Wow.
So he placed that at the centerpiece of his philosophical anthropology, his his Christian vision of fallen human nature.
Mm.
And it's not exactly fallen, it's also elevated. It's sort of like uh it's the thing which makes us willing to die for a cigarette. I mean, there's something Dostoevsky would admire those guys in one sense that, he was giving up everything just to survive. And then here's this guy saying, no, not my cigarette.
Hmm.
And so he says, well, what is that? There are people like that. I know people like that. I never knew that this was about survival. I always thought that they were just uneducated. So now he's got to recalibrate everything while he's in the camps, and it was a big change. And so the psychology of the underground is the linchpin. Now, when I taught these books, I couldn't read, I could only read maybe two books by Dostoevsky. And if one of them was going to be the Brothers Karamazov, which was going to take half the quarter anyway, to add another book was, pushing it. But I had to assign Notes from the Underground because it's the closest thing you get to a psychological portrait of the underground at its most extreme form. A person for whom the will overrides the reason at every turn. That's an underground person. That's the psychology of the underground. We're not
Can you say that again?
One's will overrides their reason.
Yeah.
You can't, the Kantian notion was, try to behave rationally. The golden rule was, the Kantian golden rule was always act as if what you did became a universal rule for everybody. So if you can imagine a world where everybody stole, then maybe, stealing is rational. But the world wouldn't work if everybody stole. The world wouldn't work if people lied all the time. So you can't get away with that. So the Kantian categorical imperative was it's got to be true for everybody or you don't get to do it. And the ultimate truth is the golden rule. You act in a way that you would want other people to act toward you.
Hmm.
Dostoevsky, coming in 1800, having spent time in a prison camp, having been arrested for treason and sentenced to death by irrational courts and a totalitarian, authoritarian government who claims to speak for God, knows that reason can be used against him in ways that further other people's irrational desires, and that they're not living for reason, they're living for their whims. And so, is there a better categorical imperative than that rational imperative?
Mm.
that
Yeah.
deals with the irrational. And that was the search in all the books. How do you get, or how do you act or deal with a world in which people are willful against their own self-interest, just to spite you, just to troll you? What do they get out of it? You know,
Hmm.
is it just pride? What can it be? Can it be disarmed? How would you disarm that? Can I imagine a character that would disarm that? So let's just talk about Notes from Underground quickly, and then we'll get on to the notes from the underground. Well, ideas about it. So it's got two parts to it. The first part is this 40-year-old man who is describing his philosophy of life, and he has lived his entire life in the underground, based on trying to assert his will over other people and not take crap and have self respect, even though it's a self respect earned at um, getting fired all the time, not having.
Now, when you're saying in the book context, what's the underground? I don't know if we said that yet, did we?
Oh, well, they just call him the underground man. He doesn't have a name. And he lives in what he calls the underground.
And the book starts with no context of what the underground is.
Uh, right. It's a state of mind in that this character is embodying. So
Mm.
he is sort of the archetypal underground man, an extreme example of the psychological type, which is somebody who when you go underground, you leave culture in order to nurse your own petty ideas. And then you imagine inflicting those ideas on the world in order to prove that you are better than the people that disagree with you. It's kind of an identity based on resentment.
Sounds a little bit like social media.
Well, yeah, it can be in its worst manifestations. It just certainly does, and also the viciousness of certain political parties and even countries that are willing to destroy thousands of people to fulfill their sense of their own uh, human nobility and rights. Um,
Yeah, I was telling one of my friends that he's listened to a few of the podcasts. I don't know if he's listened to all of them, but about Dostoevsky's coming up, and he goes, "Oh, I like Dostoevsky. Is he the one that wrote Notes from the Underground?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I love how that book opens. That's why I loved him immediately." The book opens, "I am a sick man.
yeah,
I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man."
yes, and so that whole first part, if you can make it through the first part, and then he talks in there about certain things that happened to him. Then the second part is how he became this way.
Mm.
So it takes you back into when he was in his 20s. In the second part, we go back in time to when the underground man was 20 years old or in his 20s, and it's the story of what made him this way. Uh, it it is the moment where he went underground, which is to say, he he made a choice, a moral choice, to choose his willfulness over his reason, his desires over the desires of other people, and nurse a petty resentment that he himself was being victimized by the world around him. And this is the underground in its most extreme sort of negative version. And so uh, it tells a story of him, and it's kind of, I mean, it's a very interesting story I mean, it's a typical sort of Dostoevskian story that he was writing about before. So there's this guy, and his old high school class is getting together to have a party for one of the guys who has just been given a commission in the Russian army, and he's going to be leaving St. Petersburg, and he's going to be going um, to the Crimea or someplace like that. The underground man, who was never a popular person in high school, because this is sort of classic that resentment would be born out of isolation. And Dostoevsky thought that the rise of cities and urban life was going to produce more and more isolated people who were underground, who lived in their imaginations about,
It's proved true, right?
yeah.
You
And
think of like a kooky person who lives in their apartment by themselves in New York City, and we've seen tons of movies about that person.
right, the Taxi Driver
Yeah.
is the classic underground man movie.
Oh, wow. Was it intentional or related?
I don't know if it's, I'm sure that Scorsese knows the underground well. So is the um, the one about the boxer, Raging Bull.
Oh,
That's
also,
underground man.
also De Niro?
That's De Niro, and that's also Scorsese.
Oh, wow.
And the story there is, I give up everything, my marriage, my body, my brain, to be middleweight champion of the world. Now, to be middleweight champion of the world is kind of a great accomplishment. But to give up your marriage, your family, your body, why would you do that? Why would a human being do that? Well, to show you that I am somebody. Well, is that pride or is that heroism? Well, Dostoevsky would say it's both. And until we figure that out, until we know what to do with that energy, pride, to self-destruction, we're going to have problems forever. And
Hmm.
I've been in hell in this camp, and I've seen the demons, and I've seen the people that have survived it, and I've seen the saints that have been able to live with it. And I got to write their stories because people are under the false conception that some sort of ideology or utopian society is going to clean this up. Well, hey, look again. So that becomes what happens in part two is this guy goes back to this party, and as would happen, he gets there an hour early. So he got the wrong time, but he thinks that they purposely told him the wrong time to make fun of him. So he sits in the back of the room and he drinks until he just gets totally smashed. And he waits until the man of honor is allowed to speak. And then he stands up and insults the guy and talks about what an asshole he was in high school and how he always hated him and how he thought he was a big deal, but he really was just a jerk, and insults this guy in front of all his friends.
Hmm.
And so all his friends say, well, thanks a lot for coming. We're going to go to the after party. Unfortunately, we don't have room for you. Uh, and so they leave. And then he decides that, well, I know where these guys are going. They're going to go to a house of prostitution because in Russia in the 1800s, houses of prostitution were run by the government. So they were public houses. So he goes to one of these public houses looking for his so-called friends, and they're not there. They went to a nice place. They didn't go to a house of prostitution. It's sort of like something that Travis Bickle in the Taxi Driver, takes his date to an X-rated movie because he doesn't know how to fit in. He never fit in. He was always an outsider. And so he goes to this place, and there's a young prostitute there, and he decides that, he's feeling full of himself, and he tells her that she shouldn't be in this business because guys like his friend, who's the soldier, would exploit her. And that if she ever wants to get out of the business, she should come and visit him and he would help her get out. And so he leaves feeling very, very brave and very noble, but then realizes, what if she really shows up and she sees that I live in this hovel and that I don't have a job and that my life is a shambles? I will humiliate myself. So
Hmm.
she shows up and he says, gee, I didn't really think you'd take me seriously because you're just a whore. And he insults her and calls her every name in the book. Now, Dostoevsky was experimenting with an idea in this story. He was he had met people who had suffered, who were poor, who were maybe even sold their bodies, and some of them had become really soulful people and lifted themselves out of their circumstances and had a sympathy for other underground people that would shame all the powerful people in his society. And he was wondering, would a would a prostitute with a heart of gold be able to turn this guy around by her showing sympathy for him rather than contempt?
So we're in the notes to the underground story, correct?
Yeah, we're in the story.
Yeah.
And he's trying to imagine how that conversation would go. Now, these are scenes all over Dostoevsky. And in the Brothers Karamazov, they begin on page 1 and they don't stop till you're at the end. So once you know what you're dealing with here, you're dealing with the battle for the underground. You know what's happening on every page. And it isn't some plot that's unfolding. It's a spiritual battle between forgiveness and self-hatred. That's where it's at. Everywhere, all the time.
Hmm. That is really, really cool and powerful. In a sense of like, well, a lot of what we want to do with this podcast is like hook someone into or knowing what the hook is about this writer or that writer, like or this person.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're just describing sounds a lot like how someone hooked me into certain shows where I think it was Breaking Bad and
Oh,
also
yeah.
also the show called The Walking Dead. The
Mhm.
reason the reason we got hooked, and even my one of my best friends is the reason I got hooked on both of those shows, was he said the situations, the situational moral dilemmas
Mhm.
are so compelling and complex.
Mhm.
That's why you got to watch this show.
Yes,
Sounds exactly what the underground's about.
exactly.
Like
Exactly.
even morality is not black and white in those situations, and the layers of complexity in the human heart with morality and with not like something's just blanket wrong. What if it's right in this certain context of a situational of a situation.
Yes.
Um, that's something that I think a lot of Christians in the church has gotten pretty wrong with, like under of thinking in black and white, totally just about if the Bible says this or that.
Yeah.
And you have that I'm almost done, but you have that
Yeah.
example of like people lying to the Nazis to hide Jews in their house is a great example, obviously. Like what's better, protecting this life or me telling a lie to a Nazi, you know?
Exactly. And the fundamentalists want to call this situational ethics, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and they put it down for not being absolute. Well, really, they're putting it down because it's not Kantian. What it is, it's
Kant as a philosopher represents real black and white thinking.
yes. Well, I mean that there's a rational answer. And Dostoevsky's, along with Kierkegaard, is a Christian existentialist. It's sometimes you're in existence. Human beings are functioning with the will and the reason at the same time, and sometimes going in different directions and together. And you can have a guy who's trying to pump himself up as a good person by putting down a prostitute. And and so Dostoevsky says, okay, so what if the prostitute though was a was a Christian angel who would not let this insult bother her, but see through the pain in this man's life, that he had been put down by all his friends, and that the only way he could get back any self-pride was to put me down. And I'm not offended by it. I don't take this seriously. I forgive him. So in this scene, she says to the guy, more or less, I'll paraphrase, I don't have it in front of me right now. She says to him after he chews her out, oh, you poor baby, you really are screwed up. Who did this to you? Now, what does he do? Does he come out of the underground and say, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry? Well, not if you're in the underground. You can't let a prostitute be more moral than you are. You can't let her forgive you. You've got to reassert your superiority, right? And so he just goes crazy. And that's the moment where he is committed to the underground, in fact, becomes criminal in his behavior. And that becomes the end of that part of the story. And then the very end, Dostoevsky unites the beginning and the end, where now that I'm 40, looking back on the turning point in my life when I made the mistake to choose my will over my reason and myself over other people. And this has made all the difference. Now, another way of saying it is Dostoevsky was enough of a realist to think, I really can't imagine a scene where a woman would be able to persuade a guy like that. I would like to write that scene. I would like to give lessons in that kind of change, but I can't do it in a way that's true. And because I'm a writer who writes the truth and tells you what I've experienced and what I know, from what I experienced and what I know in those camps, guys like that would not turn around no matter how much love you gave them. And so that's the end of the story. So now what do you do now? Well, I'm going to write a book where I can imagine a way that love will turn around an underground narcissistic megalomaniac. But what would that look like? So then he has Crime and Punishment, that is kind of another similar kind of exploration into can I turn an underground person around? Can Raskolnikov find redemption after giving himself over to the dark side kind of thing? Would that realistically be possible? And there again, there's a woman involved who tries to turn him around and bring him out of his underground shell. And that one, he has a somewhat of a turnaround, but it's not as persuasive, right?
Yeah.
So then you say, well, I see where we read him, and I see where he wants to go, but he didn't get there quite yet. It was not persuasive. Same way with the idiot. The idiot he was dramatizing an ideal Christian and trying to imagine an eccentric Christian who goes into
which I love the title based on that premise.
the world.
He's talking about me, basically.
Yes, the world thinks he's an idiot, but no, he sees through the underground. And what would happen to him? Well, I had created a romantic Christian that I don't really think could exist in the world I know. And so in some ways, it's a failure as a work of art, but not in terms of a anthropological experiment, a thought experiment in trying to imagine what an ideal Christian would be. And so then he moves on to he has this idea that he's going to write a super novel called the Life of a Great Sinner, in which he tells the story of an underground man who is turned around and becomes a exemplary Christian, but finds that it's too complicated to put into one character. The only way you could really talk about that dynamic would be in multiple characters, a polyphonic novel where you had brothers, and each brother represented the complexity of the human psyche in one particular incarnation. And then you brought them together and they had conversations. And then they had conversations with other underground figures or other saintly figures or half-saint figures or half-murderers. And that would be the way you could maybe bring it to life. So the Brothers Karamazov, the exemplary Christian is Alyosha.
Yeah.
But you don't meet him as an exemplary Christian. You meet him as the youngest brother of three extremely weird underground men. One who's an underground intellectual, one who's an underground sensualist, and then one who's just a downright psychopath. And then there's another one who's the father of this family, who was the father of dysfunction, if you want to think of it that way, a archetypal underground figure for whom he sacrificed his own sons for his own willfulness.
And this concludes episode 12, Dostoevsky Part 1. Stay tuned for Dostoevsky Part 2. Thank you for listening to Subversive Orthodoxy. If today's conversation stirred something in you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or somewhere in the middle of deconstruction, know this. This isn't about reclaiming an old religious philosophy. It's about realizing that there are ancient constants that challenge the very things in culture that are dehumanizing us as we speak. We're going to continue exploring what it means to live a life of deep meaning in this world that often feels fragmented and nihilistic. And this prophetic imagination doesn't seem to come to us from the expected places. It's not confined to pulpits or seminaries. The prophetic voice is breaking through in novels, poetry, charity work, art, and the unexpected corners of culture. We hope you'll continue to join us in this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening.
Spiritually, I want to jump off a cliff without a parachute like I'm high.
If you found this meaningful, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with anyone who might resonate with this conversation. Adios. This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchausti.